The liberation of Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, from Islamic State brought great celebration, but much of the city is in ruins after 3 years of struggle. What are the prospects for Mosul's post-war reconstruction? The US military presence in Iraq is an important factor for the country's security and fight against terrorism. Neighboring countries have also become important players in Iraq's domestic affairs. What is the state of Iraq's relations with both neighboring countries and the US? How will Trump's tough sanctions on Iran be seen by Iraq? The Kurdish issue still remains sensitive and complex for Iraq, Iran and Turkey. How are the Kurds viewed in these countries, and what is their ongoing role in anti-terrorism? China and Iraq's strategic partnership since 2015 offers much potential cooperation on Iraq reconstruction, but security still remains the biggest concern. How can cooperation with China help Iraq to rebuild itself?
Iraqi troops have finally liberated Mosul from the tyranny of ISIL 3 years after it fell into the hands of terrorists. But winning the battle does not mean victory in the war, as 7,000 affiliates of Daesh remain scattered across Iraq. Iraq faces a bleak future of national reconciliation and post-war reconstruction as Kurds demand independence in northern Iraq, and the Shiite majority Iraqi government has to rally the country behind its crusade against terror. Will China contribute most to the post-war rebuilding in the country, as it takes half of Iraq's oil exports? How will Baghdad deal with an embattled Iran when President Trump says the US will impose more sanctions against the Persian state? To address these and other issues, I'm honored to interview His Excellency, the Iraqi Ambassador to China, Mr. Ahmad Berwari. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our program, Mr. Ambassador. The liberation of Mosul is militarily winning a battle. However, are you confident that you're going to win the war with 7,000 more what was remained of the Daesh throughout the whole country of Iraq? What do you think of the latest development?
First of all, thank you very much for getting the initiative and interviewing me, to give me the opportunity to speak to your respected viewer. The victory of Mosul, it was a historic one, and since the last 9 months, young Iraqis from different backgrounds and communities, from different ethnicities, religions and cities, fought together collectively against ISIS. We have defeated ISIS in Mosul, and it was for us a very important victory, because Mosul, it is the second largest city in Iraq, and because of its geostrategic location also. And secondly, Mosul, important for ISIS, it has a symbolic importance, because in Mosul, al-Baghdadi proclaimed the establishment of the so-called Islamic Caliphate, or the Islamic State. And the Iraqis proved that the view or the opinion or the rumor that ISIS is not defeatable is wrong. We have defeated ISIS, we have liberated the city, and we are very happy about this big victory. And at the same time, I would like to underline that it is not a victory just for Iraq or for the Iraqis. That's true that we are fought on the front line against terrorism, but at the same time, it was a big victory for the civilized world, and especially for the countries supported Iraq in this war, including China.
People are wondering aloud if the city of Mosul has been reduced to rubble. Is it a site of ruins and there's nothing left, basically, for the rebuilding?
Yes, it is very sad to see the city of Mosul now, after 3 years of occupation by these terror organizations. And you and your viewer knows, to liberate a city, it means to start an operation, a military operation. And now, after the liberation, started our units, engineering units of the military and security forces, first of all to open the streets, the roads, to remove the ruins and the explosions, and to make it possible for vehicles to move in the city. And the second step is to provide basic services for the people, electricity, water supplying, maybe simple medical services, just to make it easy and possible for the people to go back to their homes. And the third step would be, of course, difficult and takes time. It is the step of the rebuilding and the whole infrastructure of the city. And I think without the help of our, including China, it would be not very easy for the Iraqi government because of the financial difficulties, because of the drop of the oil prices and the high expenditure of the military operations to do it alone.
When we go back to what happened 3 years ago, the whole world was shocked by the sweeping military victory of Daesh, the ISIL. Hence, the next immediate question was why the Iraqi government forces were defeated so quickly. Now, many in the United States were talking about whether training programs for Iraqi government forces or militias would be a very important step in defeating ISIL or the Islamic Caliphate. Do you think such programs would be very helpful even in the future?
Yes, you know, to defeat ISIS or terror organizations like ISIS in Iraq or in another country, it is not enough to be prepared militarily to counter this phenomena in the country. Of course, we were shocked when ISIS easily occupied Mosul, a big city of more than 2 million inhabitants, people living in the city, and with the presence of the Iraqi army and security forces. The tension between the communities was one of the reasons why a part of the people living in Mosul maybe supported ISIS, because it was not very easy for a small group with majority fighters from outside Iraq to occupy a city like Mosul.
Are you actually critical of, in your understatement of the response, are you somehow critical of what the former Prime Minister Maliki did? The mistakes he made may have led to the division, an ethnic division between Shiites and Sunnis, between these ethnic groups and the Kurds. And therefore, that led to the quick fall of Mosul 3 years ago, the establishment of a caliphate.
Well, it is not very easy for public officers to give statements about politicians in Iraq, and especially about a very important figure like Mr. Maliki, who was a prime minister in Iraq, and he is still a wise minister, a wise president.
He certainly drew a lot
Iraq.
of criticism from the United States
yes,
for the alleged mistakes he made in not being able to consolidate his power base with other ethnic groups like Sunnis and Kurds. Therefore, he stepped down.
Well, we take statements from think tanks or from the government of the United States in consideration, but doesn't mean that all statements of the United States or these think tanks in the States are not wrong. And if you ask Mr. Maliki, maybe he has arguments why he decided to do or to not do something at that time. I believe for sure the tension between the communities was one of the reasons why ISIS could occupy and administrate a part of Iraq which was and still a Sunni part of Iraq. And secondly, and the influence of countries, neighboring countries in our country was huge at that time. And the destabilization of the situation in these Sunnis, so-called Sunni areas in the west part of Iraq happened years before of entering a terror organization like ISIS in these areas, started with protest actions of politicians. Sunni politicians were part of the government, and we have a saying, unfortunately, in Iraq, to say that in the morning they were ministers and the evening were oppositions politicians. And I think after the occupation of Mosul and after the damage and the catastrophe what has been as a consequence of this policy of terror organizations like ISIS in Sunni areas, would lead Sunni politicians and especially the Sunni community to prepare to a new way to receive or to cooperate with the Union government in Baghdad. And that is, as I mentioned in the beginning, would be clear.
What do you think of the future
elections.
of having a Kurdistan, independent Kurdistan in northern Iraq? And what do you think of the prospects of having disintegration of Iraq between Kurds, Sunnis, and Shiites?
Well, you know, I am a Kurd. Therefore, it is very difficult for me to answer this question. I would like to start, first of all, the Kurds are the biggest ethnic group in the Middle East without having the chance to be in a nation state like the others, like the Arabs.
How many of them in the Middle East?
There is no exact statistics, but there's about 30 to 40 million Kurds living in Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran and other countries in the region.
And do you think Kurds are the biggest winner of the civil strife in Syria and of the chaos in the Middle East in general? Because they are able to rally themselves behind the banner of rebuilding its own homeland, and those in exile in the neighboring countries of the Middle East are able to converge in Iraq, Syria, to seriously address the issue of having a shared future?
Well, I don't believe that they are the biggest winner, because the Kurds are part of these countries. And you know, in Iraq, the president is from the Kurdish community, the foreign minister was for 10 years, and there's ministers in the cabinet also. And myself, I'm a diplomat and represent the Iraqi government. And therefore, instability in these areas, in Iraq or Syria, or I don't know where, it would be not in the interest of the Union governments and also of my community in the region. The Iraqi Kurds, they were in control of the central government from the beginning of the 90s, after the liberation of Kuwait.
With the end of the Cold War?
Yes.
That happened at the same year?
Yes. The
1991?
91. The Kurds in this region, they had the chance to administrate themselves without the influence of the central government. But after 2003, these Kurds also, they decided to be reintegrated in the other parts of Iraq, which was not a part of, didn't have any influence in their region.
Now, Turkey is a very strong neighboring country of Iraq. It is also home to millions of Kurds. PKK is one movement that has caused a lot of clashes between Ankara and this pro-independence movement. So do you believe Iraq also comes under huge influence, if not has been interfered with by Turkey now and then? It could be a big problem for the two countries.
For sure, Iran and Turkey, both of these big regional important countries have big influence in the political development, not just in Iraq, in the Kurdish area, in the KRG area also. And I believe, to go back to your question, as I told you, maybe the Kurds, they had the dream to be able once, like the other nations in the region, in our region, to have their own state. But the Kurdish politicians, especially in Iraq, they are experienced enough to know to follow and establish an independent Kurdish state and to be separated from Iraq. It is not so easy. First of all, you need at least support in the region, if not internationally. Secondly, you have to have a economic independence to be able to finance the city. And there is also other matters. There's not just Kurds in Iraq living in the KRG regions. There's Kurds in Baghdad, in Kirkuk, and in this, we call it disputed areas between Arabs and Kurds. These questions and these reasons would be not helpful for the Kurds in the moment to establish a known state.
Now we have developed a better understanding about the situation in northern Iraq and the future of the Kurds. But you are watching Dialogue with His Excellency Mr. Ahmad Berwari, Ambassador of Iraq to China. We're discussing how to rebuild a war-torn Mosul, the former capital city of ISIL, the so-called Islamic Caliphate, a terrorist organization. Whether the Iraqi government will be able to eliminate the ideology that has been the driving force behind the rise of a caliphate, the Daesh, in the Middle East. We'll be back in a short while. Please stay with us. Welcome back, sir. We shared a lot with you about the military campaign that you were able to achieve against Daesh weeks ago. And we wonder if China will make contributions to the rebuilding of not only Mosul but Iraq since 2003, after the US-led invasion of Iraq drove Saddam Hussein out and got him killed.
Well, first of all, Iraq and China have long-standing historical relations going back to the late, from our side, from the Iraqi side, from the late 50s. And since then, the relation was always friendly, and despite the difficulties which Iraq went through in the last 30 or 40 years, the Chinese government and Chinese people stood behind Iraq and shown understanding to the situation in Iraq. After 2003, China was not a part of the military operation and was also not a part of the change which is happening in my country, but immediately started after 2003 to support Iraq, and we have now strategic relations with China, and the contribution of China in helping Iraq to develop its economy, to rebuild its infrastructure is huge. And at the same time, the contribution of China in supporting Iraq in its fight against ISIS, it is for us clear, because China donated many times financial support to help the Iraqi government to rebuild the liberated areas from ISIS. And secondly, there is also military and intelligence.
But I'm afraid the majority of the Chinese who follow your rebuilding campaign may ask if our nationals can be protected given the sectarian violence. Well, China is also involved in the reconstruction in the war-torn country of Afghanistan, where your embassy came under attack from ISIL. So the issue of security, of course, generates a lot of front-page stories for the Chinese who want to reach out and help our Iraqi brothers and sisters. But the security of our nationals would be a major issue.
Yes, you know, Iraq is a big country, and there is parts of Iraq are safe and secure to do business and to invest. In the south part of Iraq, in the Kurdish area, in the KRG region, and also in other parts in Iraq. And secondly, there is no sectarian wars in Iraq. There is a war between the Iraqis and the terror organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And I think the competition to do business in Iraq is huge. And it means it's huge maybe with the risks we have in the security field. The Iraqi government is keen to make it comfortable as possible for our friends to help us to rebuild our country, and a very clear indicate for the presence and for the will of the Chinese companies to work in Iraq is the numbers of Chinese workers and the presence of Chinese companies. And as I told you, in one of the most important sectors in Iraq, oil, China is number one in buying and investing and helping Iraq in this field.
About 19 months ago, a strategic relationship or strategic partnership was established between our two governments. And President Xi Jinping drafted his outline about the Belt and Road Initiative and hosted a summit to lay groundwork about how to advance this ambitious vision. Do you believe Iraq will be an important part of this ambitious vision of the Chinese authorities?
Yes, the initiative of the Belt and Road of the Honorable President of China is welcome in Iraq. And in 2015, during the visit of my Prime Minister, we have signed a memorandum of understanding to be a part of this initiative. It means Iraq is officially now a part of the initiative of the Belt and Road. Economically, of course, it would be an advantage of Iraq to have the possibility and the opportunity to take support and to interact with a big country like China, with a developed economy, and with a great player in the world. Of course, the cultural relations between the two countries are also huge. We believe the initiative, it's very important for us in Iraq, not just economically, but also we believe that this initiative would create a peaceful climate in our region. Because if you have countries are parts or members of this initiative, these countries, they have to cooperate to show understanding to each other. And therefore we believe that this initiative, besides the economic and development profits for our region, it is also a big maybe a big push for our countries also to cooperate together and to look forward to be a peaceful part of this big initiative.
Ambassador Berwari, China is one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and we are the biggest trade partners of Iraq in terms of our rebuilding and investment there. But Iran is obviously a so important neighboring country. It shares with Iraq the Shiite belief. But with the campaign success of Donald Trump, the White House promised to reconsider the lifting of the economic sanctions. It reconsiders the relationship with Tehran. Will that be a major challenge for Baghdad to develop a healthy relationship with Tehran and even with Turkey, which started to have very serious problems with Washington following the failed coup attempt last year?
Well, first of all, Iraq is an independent country, and we have our sovereignty, and we are not shaping our foreign policy dictated by superpowers also like the United States, because first of all we believe that we have to decide which art of or way of policy is useful and in the interest of our people in Iraq. Iran is a big regional country, and we share a long border with Iraq. In the 80s, Iraq made a big mistake and started a war against Iran. We in Iraq were the victims of the wrong policy of the former Iraqi regime of Saddam Hussein in attacking a neighboring country. We lost more than 500,000 Iraqis in this war, and therefore we are very keen to have a peaceful, good relation with Iran, and we have it now, economically, politically, and of course the majority of the Shia population in Iraq, and there is a big number of Shias from Iran visiting Iraq yearly to visit the holy cities in Najaf and Karbala. One of the problems which we believe that was the reason for it in Iraq is the competition between powers on Iraqi soil, between the West and Iran, between countries in the region, between themselves. And therefore, if you remember, we were very, very happy about the deal which signed between Iran, nuclear deal, I mean, between Iran and the United States, because it is in our interest in Iraq to have a understanding between these two countries, because an understanding between Iran or an agreement between Iran or with the Western world, and especially with the United States, is in the interest of the stability of the region. And therefore, of course, worried if this agreement be cancelled. And at the same time, we are asking the partners or the parties of these agreements to take it in consideration that cancelling this agreement, it would be harmful for the whole region and maybe for the whole world.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.